Hey everybody, it's Andy. I want to let you know that this episode was recorded as a live stream broadcast with our guests, Oklahoma City City Council members JoBeth Hamon, James Cooper, as well as Laura McDevitt, who is one of the general counsel for the City Council. Those are different spellings of the word council, in case you didn't pick up on that. And also Elizabeth Sidler from Generation Citizen, who was involved on the citizen side of the discussion about proposing changes to the city charter of Oklahoma City. So I apologize. It was a difficult live stream. Our internet connection was somewhat unstable, so some of the audio is not as good as usual. I appreciate your patience and hope that you find this episode both informative and useful. Enjoy. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Let's Pod This Live. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I'm joined by Scott. Hello, sir.
What is up, man? How are you?
I'm adequate, perfectly adequate.
Right.
Also, Bailey Perkins. Hello, Bailey. Thanks for being here.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Andy.
And we have a number of special guests that will be joining us in just a moment. The focus of this episode, as some of you may know, is that we're going to be discussing the proposed changes to the Oklahoma City Charter. I got my absentee ballot in the mail yesterday or the day before, and I have the pink part is all of the proposed changes. I've got it right here on my keyboard as we talk about it. And so we want to start, before we begin, we want to acknowledge that this week has been burdensome for lots of folks, right? And I'm sure for lots of our listeners, many people are grieving the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Hopefully some of you were able to tune in to the live stream of the vigil that the Oklahoma Women's Coalition held on Tuesday night at the Capitol, and we broadcast it on our channels as well, because not everyone could get out there. And then certainly also the latest decision and news regarding Breonna Taylor's murder, and the lack of justice that has happened there. It has been a difficult week in lots of ways. Governor Stitt did order the state's flags, state and national flags, to fly at half staff in Justice Ginsburg's honor, which is a big deal. She's the first woman and the first Jewish person to lay in state at the U.S. Capitol, which I think is very significant. And certainly vigils and other actions that have been happening in Oklahoma and across the country related to the news about Breonna Taylor's case. So there's that. Also on Tuesday was a busy day. Tuesday was also National Voter Registration Day. So there's been a whole string of voter registration events around the country and here in Oklahoma. A lot of organizations, civic leaders held events this week. And it is super important to register because it's a big election, right? Like we're electing president and House of Representatives and all of the State House and a third of the Senate and all these things. Here in Oklahoma, we have the changes to the city charter. In Oklahoma City, we have 2 state questions, a bunch of judges, county races, everything else varies on where you live. Please vote. You still have time to register. In Oklahoma, you must have your registration in by October 9th. And if somehow you have stumbled upon our podcast about Oklahoma politics and you're not registered, we need to talk because that would be exceptional in several ways.
You need to message one of us on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or something, or in our comment section, so that we can physically pick you up and take you to register to vote.
Right.
We cannot register for you, but we can arrange for you to do it.
And also, there's still time to sign up for your absentee ballot as well, so you'll have options to vote. And so I got my absentee ballot in the mail recently, and you have until October 27th to request that. So I got all of these sheets of paper in my envelope. And so you'll want to know what all is going to be on your ballot. You'll want to know how to package your envelopes and what to do with all of that information. So go ahead and request that absentee ballot in advance.
Yeah, and I can't emphasize that enough, Bailey. Like, you have until October 27th. Please, for the love of all that is good and pure, do not wait until October 27th. If you wait until October 27th, you may not have your ballot before the election, number one. And even if you do, you may not be able to get it back to the post office in time, or to the county election board in time. And by law in Oklahoma, they have to have, it's not postmarked by election day, right? In Oklahoma, they have to receive your ballot by the time the polls close on election day, which in Oklahoma is 7 p.m. So you have, like if you're already registered and you're planning on voting absentee and you haven't requested your ballot, please do that today. If you're not registered, please register post haste. Stop listening. Come back. It's recorded. You can listen to it later. Go register right now. Come back, finish the podcast, and then request your absentee ballot.
We can. We'll even put the link for you in the chat in just a second. If you're watching this on Facebook, YouTube, or maybe even Periscope, I think, and you have questions or comments along the way, it is.
Periscope's still around. I had no idea.
Yeah.
For Twitter, yeah.
I think Twitter bought it, actually.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why it's still there. Mm-hmm. Anyway, if you have questions or comments along the way, you can put them into the live chat there, and we can see them, and we can add them. So, like, Jana Harkins said, "Hey, Bailey," and we say, "Hey, Jana,
hello.
Thanks for being here."
Yes.
Also, how colorful was the ballot this year? This is very exciting. The instructions are much better than they were back in June. The election board has heard our cries and the gnashing of teeth and has made some appropriate changes, which is good. Okay. I do want to say, we will have Elizabeth Sidler from Generation Citizen on in just a moment, but regarding voter registration day, Generation Citizen and the League of Women Voters of Oklahoma County partnered up for a really rad voter reg drive yesterday, on Thursday, at all 11 high schools, public high schools in Oklahoma City Public Schools. I went to Northwest Classen, which is my neighborhood high school here, and we had 2 grown-ups and 2 students. And so we divided up that we would register the adults and they could register students and that are 17 and a half or older. And we had, 6 or 7 that came through during the day. We did it during the meal pickup in the middle of the day. It was really great, and it was refreshing to me, I will be honest, to talk to some high school students who had organized their part on their own. They had connected with some national organizations to get materials and instructions on how to do it, and so it was a really great event.
And I also want to lift up Councilwoman Nikki Nice, because she's been organizing voter registration drives throughout her ward, Ward 7, in the east side of Oklahoma City. And so I know there was one on National Voter Registration Day, and then there's been several before, and there'll be some, I think, through October 9th when the registration deadline occurs. And so just wanted to give her a shout out for hosting those drives around the east side of Oklahoma City.
Right on. Excellent.
And the Thunder's been doing registration.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's just been so many entities engaged in civic engagement. I had the opportunity earlier this week to talk with Langston University's athletic department. So I had 140 folks tuning in about how to get registered and how to early vote and all the information that they need. And so I think Oklahomans are really fired up, and there's lots of opportunities, if you haven't registered yet, to connect with the right folks to get you registered.
See, civic engagement can be fun. All right. Well, on that note, let's get into the meat of what we're talking about today, because this is a lot of stuff. I know we've had tons of questions individually and collectively. Thank you to listeners who submitted questions in advance, even. We are going to bring on to the stream right now Councilwoman JoBeth Hamon. Hello, JoBeth. Thank you for being here. Sorry I added you right when you took a bite. That's the way it works. This is why I finish my cookies first. We'll also bring on Councilman James Cooper. Hello. Thanks for being here. And then also from the city, Laura McDevitt, who is one of the general counsel for up there. Hello, Laura. Thanks for being here. And then Elizabeth Sidler, I mentioned earlier. Hello, Elizabeth. Let's change our format. Ooh, thanks for being here. Elizabeth, do you know how many people we registered in total yesterday?
We registered about 60 folks to vote yesterday and talked with several hundred more who were already registered to confirm that they had a plan to vote. And so I think, registered 60 folks, but got to talk to a lot more.
Yeah, it was really, at some point the students at our location kind of took over, like approaching all the vehicles and talking to people, and it was fun overhearing some of the conversations of people like, "Hey, are you registered to vote?" And everyone's like, "Yes." They were like, "Okay," and so they even went out. They got a little bored, and so they went and just canvassed the neighborhood and like left flyers on doors and were knocking. And I was like, "You go ahead. That's really good." And they brought burritos, which was even better for me. But that's
JoBeth, it's Savannah. Yeah.
Ah, see, that's who it was. Yes, shout out to Savannah and her friend.
Sorry, no, I was like trying to. Savannah is one of my youth council members for this year's youth council, so she's all about the civic engagement, and she's like such a go-getter. So I'm so excited to hear that.
I love it.
All right, Bailey, do you want to kick us off with our first question for our panelists?
Absolutely. So we are grateful to have you to get information about the changes to the Oklahoma City Charter. This is the first time in a long time that we've had any changes to this charter. And so I know so many people need to be aware of what's going on with it and what they're going to see on their ballot to make an informed decision. So thank you for your time today. So our first question is, what is the city charter? What does that mean to the residents of Oklahoma City? So we'll start with Laura, since you are our attorney on staff, if you want to give us some insight on what the city charter is.
Sure. So it's the shortest answer really is that it is the governing document of the city. It is the equivalent of the city's constitution. So it is only able to be changed by a vote of the people. Council can't change it. Council can recommend changes like they have here, but ultimately it is up to the voters of Oklahoma City how the charter reads.
Have we ever changed the charter before?
Oh, yes. It happens fairly regularly. I think most recently, it was maybe a year or two ago, there was an amendment to allow for teachers, because there was a prohibition on dual office holding and dual employment between different governmental entities, and it was revised so that you could be both a teacher and a council person.
Shout out to Councilman James Cooper, who's here with us today. So, you said it can be changed by a vote of the people, right? So, like, as I recall, the U.S. Constitution, like, it's quite a cumbersome process to get people to vote to change for it. Is this like we propose changes, or someone proposes changes, and it's 51% and it changes, or is it 2/3, or like how does this work?
It is just a majority vote.
Oh, so simple.
So there's not a super majority or 2/3 or anything like that required.
And no one can filibuster it.
Right.
Okay. All right. Delightful.
So who drafts these proposed changes?
So Mayor Holt had appointed the Charter Review Committee, and they had been meeting since I think it was maybe February or so, January, I can't quite remember, and had been going through some recommendations that both city staff had thought needed to be updated in the charter, and then also the council members. So then our office kind of took those, and the municipal councilor and I helped draft the language to actually facilitate the changes that they wanted to see.
But as I understand it, those changes can also be proposed by just residents of the city. And I think it's by a petition process. Those sorts of changes can get proposed to be added by council to a vote.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with that process, but yeah, I don't see why there couldn't be anything, a resident couldn't contact their council representative, and then their council representative introduce something at an agenda item at council to call. Just similar to what happened with the most recent charter amendment for the dual office holding.
Well, and
So
I wanted to ask Elizabeth about that because I know you were involved kind of early. How did you get involved in this process?
Instagram. Councilman Cooper posted about the sort of the next upcoming meeting of the review committee, and so I spent the weekend just like reading the charter and made a list of like what are the things that could be different, and then put out a poll. I think just like on Twitter, just like a Google form, and had people check the boxes of like, which of these things do you think are a good idea? And check. So I took that information, attended the next meeting, and I emailed Laura about a variety of things. It was like, I would like to do this. Does this make any sense? Is this possible? How could we, how would we word that? And some of it was stuff that they were already considering, like gender neutral language throughout the charter, referring to council members or other city staff. And then others were things that didn't end up making it into charter changes, but then got carried by Councilman Cooper as just changes to code, a 20-day citizen input process in the budget, for example. But yeah, I just read it and then attended the meeting, and that was pretty much it.
So we have the city's constitution essentially that needs to be updated from time to time, and it sounds like it's a fairly straightforward process to do that. One can even initiate it on the Instagrams, as it were. So maybe the meat of this is kind of our next question, and I don't know how we want to do this. If we want to round robin it or everybody kind of chime in. What are the proposed changes? I've heard a lot of words about like modernization. I know that there's some stuff in the charter that like was in conflict with state law that had to be resolved. It seems like there was a lot of kind of work under the hood that needed to be done. So what are we voting on?
Well, and maybe can we go in the order of the propositions themselves?
Yeah,
So maybe start with like Proposition 1. What's going on there? What does that mean? And then go from there.
Councilman Cooper, you want to?
Hey there. Thanks for the invite. Also, Elizabeth, like that description of like the post on Instagram saying, hey, anyone have any ideas? And you're like, I'll take it from here, everybody. Ward 2. That's who we got here. It's what we do. I love that story. So yeah, the first one deals with just some language around the general election. So like to give you an example, when I ran for office for the 2019 election, I started that summer before knocking doors, and then the election was February 12th. Councilwoman Hamon remembers it well. and so then the question was if in either of our elections as council members, if we did not secure a 50% majority of the electorate, then we would see the other closest, let's say, in my instance where I had 5 folk in that election, if none of us secured 50% or higher, then the top 2 vote getters would face off again just a few months later. And so what this proposal does is it sort of clears up some of the language surrounding what we call those 2 elections. And Laura, would you amend anything of what I just said? And then if not, just kind of take it from there.
No, I think that pretty well captures it, because I think the way that the charter is written now, that is called the primary, and that kind of leads people to think that there is going to be a general election when that's not necessarily the case. So we want to clarify that, if this is the general election and then there's potentially a runoff, but don't think that you don't need to vote in the primary election. That's critical.
And this was something that, I didn't propose it, but it was something the committee members, considered. And as they did, it reminded me of an interaction I actually had at the doors where I met someone and they're like, yeah, you seem great, but you know what? Like, this is the primary, and I I don't want to give my support one way or the other yet. And I was like, whoa, but I had not thought of the election in that way. I was in it to win it that first night. Like, I didn't want to head to a runoff. It was very tiring knocking the doors and then teaching the middle school from 8 to 4. Well, actually, teaching from 8:30, then finishing at 4, then going to knock those doors. You know, I was really hoping that we could, together with the voters, secure a victory that February 12th for my own mental and physical health.
You didn't want to keep going for another 2 months?
Look, I would have.
For funsies?
I don't know if for funsies is the correct word I would use, but I would have kept going. I absolutely would have. I'm already thinking about the door knocking again. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and
I
thank
want
you for
to
that.
highlight. I was gonna say, I want to highlight that part of the reason that this is necessary is that city council races are nonpartisan, right? So we don't have primaries for each party. So the election is the election, and then a runoff if it's necessary based on that election. So it makes sense. And as we go along, and Bailey, I'll kick it to you in just a second, but we had someone that asked if we could explain who proposed each change or proposition. I don't know if you guys know that information. It's not on the ballot, which is probably why people want to know where this stuff came from. So if anyone has that info or think that's helpful in sharing as we go along, please chime in.
Or was it one of municipal council? Can you remember if it was Mr. Kenny Jordan?
I don't actually remember who specifically raised this issue. I don't know if it may have been the city clerk, but I'm not 100%.
Could be because the city clerk was involved in this process too, and a lot of, I mean, the overwhelming majority of these were ones that either the city clerk raised to the committee members or someone from municipal council, kind of similar to the process where Elizabeth went and read the charter. You know, people like our city clerk and our municipal council, they're very, very familiar with it and have encountered in moments where it's like, oh, wow, some clarity here would really help guide everybody. So, but I can't remember who particularly brought this up. Like I said, someone brought it up and it triggered that memory in my head of going, oh yeah, door knocking, I remember, you know, and needed to sleep a long time.
Is there a limit to like how often this can be done, or like can we like so we could do it again at the next election if we wanted to, right? Like so because I as you're explaining that, it made me wonder like, is it a deal where it's like oh we're changing the charter and I've had this on my back burner for 3 years, but if we're going to vote on other charter changes, let's do it now, or like you can change it any time if you need to.
It could be at any time. I think there's specific time frames, which I can't recall off the top of my head, for when council needs to call for an election and how all that works in order to make the certain election deadlines for filing, because the city clerk has to then compile those ballot summaries that are published. And also there needs to be the textual amendments need to be published in the journal record. And so there's a lot of those kinds of procedural hurdles for when we can actually get something on a ballot. So just as long as we're able to meet those, I don't think there's a limit to the number of elections we could have on the charter.
So I think that's an important piece to raise for our listeners, is that whenever you see changes that you want made to our city charter, that could happen throughout the year. And you don't have to wait until an election to talk with somebody about something that should be changed in our city charter. So build a relationship with your city council members so that you can weigh in and an opportunity to make whatever necessary changes that help advance and make our city work better. And so earlier I mentioned that the changes don't have to happen as often on the charter, but as we see, it could happen, each year or even different elections if we need it to. But I think having 9 propositions is something that is pretty unique around this time. And so thank you all for being willing to even talk about all 9 of these today. So we talked about the first proposition. Let's move on into the second proposition and what that means and who may have proposed that.
Do you want me to take the lead on that one?
Go for it, Laura.
Councilwoman Hamon or Councilperson Cooper want to? Okay. So this is the one that would change the residency requirements. Currently, the charter provides that you need to be a resident of Oklahoma City for 3 years prior to filing. And it seems as though, we've done some research into case law across the country, and 3 years is probably a little too long to really be justifiable. And so we wanted to shorten that to what we think is a stronger position of 1 year. And we're also proposing to change the requirement for ward residency to clarify that also, so that right now we've been falling back on a state provision, which I think is 6 months. But now this would make it for 1 year that you've been a registered voter in the ward where you're wanting to file for candidacy. And I think that was something that I believe our office had proposed, because we had concerns about whether or not the 3 years was something that would be upheld.
That's my memory as well, that it was from municipal council, and specifically the reason Laura was talking about going, wait a second, is this what will hold up, right? If someone challenged this, then it's not really in accordance. Like, in other words, are we putting an undue burden on a resident who wants to serve in office?
And previously, you didn't have to live in the ward, or at least be registered to vote in the ward for which you wanted to run for a council seat? Is that?
No, you needed to live there, I think, for 6 months. And then there's actually been some litigation over that particular issue. So, and how to prove your residency and those kinds of things. So we wanted to do that.
And is it my understanding that litigation was specifically the crux of the argument was that the state law and our charter were in disagreement, and so we had been just falling back on state law as practice, but that there's just that discrepancy.
Our office wasn't directly involved in that litigation. It was between the two candidates, so I don't know what their specific arguments were that they made. That very well may be the case.
All right. So we've got the first proposition. We're looking at like just what we're calling the elections and about when you can put notice. The second proposition, we're looking at essentially where candidates have to live and for how long before they can declare candidacy. Right? Is the down and dirty of it, I guess. What is proposition 3? What's the third proposition, and what's the purpose of that? Councilwoman Hamon? Yeah.
I'm going to keep deferring to Laura and Councilman Cooper, because I was not involved in the development of these, so I'm still not as conversant in them as I would like to be.
Well, then
Well, how about we start with Laura for the baseline descriptions of each of the propositions, and then Councilman Cooper, if you could weigh in on what it means what it means to the residents of Oklahoma City.
Sure. It. Yeah. So, Laura? What do we have on Proposition 3?
So, Proposition 3 changes the amount of time that council has to call for a special election if there's a vacancy in the office of mayor, and this makes it consistent with the same amount of time that we have for calling a special election if there is a vacancy in a council member position as opposed to mayor. And right now, I think it's 15 days, but council only meets every other week. So we're proposing to change that to 30 days.
Yeah, and this was definitely one the municipal council brought to our attention. And, Laura, would you say it was more of like for the just timeliness of the transition in these sorts of moments, and not letting that seat just sit vacant for an extended period of time? Or was there a specific legal reason why we were concerned in that way?
Well, it was going to potentially cause a problem with the agendas, because with council only meeting every other week, if there's only 15 days to call a special election and the vacancy happens on the Monday before a Tuesday council meeting, we're going to have a difficult time meeting that 15-day time frame. So we wanted to extend that to be consistent with council and to not potentially violate the charter.
That seems like a reasonable idea to me. Any other comments on Proposition 3? No? Hearing none. Proposition 4, then. Laura, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure. That one is just simply that how frequently council meets. I think there's some language in there now about requiring them to meet every Tuesday or is required by ordinance. Anyway, this is just clearing it up to match our current practices.
It is always interesting to me as a citizen of this world, how often like rules, laws, statutes like say one thing and then actual practice is something different. And this applies to like bylaws for organizations and how everything happens, right? Like we've all been a part of some organization, church, something, where you're like, well, how do we do X? And then you like look it up in the bylaws and it's like, oh, that's not at all how it's ever happened. Or that hasn't happened that way for 20 years. We should update these things. So.
Well, and especially
Kudos.
as time changes and technology changes and other things. So those types of changes are necessary in ensuring that our council and our city can be timely and do things in ways that make sense for the moment that we're in. So.
And I would add to that point, just as a resident who has participated to a certain extent in this process, that even participating in it a little bit, that I think that it feels like, because it is legal language ultimately, that there's some sort of hurdle or barrier of knowledge or expertise, which on a certain level is true, but that's what our wonderful municipal council's office is for, is to make that language actionable in a legal context. But the documents are living and need to be responsive to our residents and their experiences. And so I think starting to think about our governing documents in that way is just a helpful thing for residents to do. Like start thinking about the laws as living and responsive, and that may change the way that you think about problems too, right? Like recognizing one's own agency to respond in a policy sense, advocating for some change in policy, in this case, the charter.
I would just say that is incredibly well said.
And leave it to someone from Generation Citizen to like make that case, you know. And coincidentally, this month in my arts and human values course at OCU, and then my English comp classes this month, they are reading Boomtown about our city's history and comparing it week by week to a PBS documentary on the Italian Renaissance and the Medici family. And episode 3 focused specifically on the Protestant Reformation. And I have to tell you all, so it's 5 classes I'm teaching this semester, 5. And in all 5 classes, as we've concluded that documentary, and I asked them, what was the most fascinating or shocking thing you took from these 4 episodes? And several of them cited the Protestant Reformation, not necessarily because they're Protestant students, but they were so shocked. They did not, and it was the same for me when I watched the documentary 10 years ago, where when one realizes that, you know, for over a good 1,000 years, from the creation of the Christian Bible through that Protestant Reformation, that to be able to read it, for an individual to know how to read, number 1, to have received an education on how to read, and 2, to be able to read, kind of back to Elizabeth's word, the governing document for them. The Bible was the governing document for almost all of Western Europe. And that was denied to them. And my students were just shocked. Just really, I mean, I don't know, maybe as you're an adult and you re-encounter that moment in human history, it kind of takes on this extra weight. And yeah, agency was sort of the key word for us in those discussions we had in class, where it's just like, if we don't read our founding documents for ourselves, whether it's the U.S. Constitution, the state constitution, God help us, the state constitution, I mean, to understand it's very, very lengthy. And then our city charter, if we don't read these texts for ourselves, we're relying on somebody else's interpretation of those texts for us. And we have removed our sense of agency, our individualism. we've removed those brains from our heads to be critical thinkers and arrive at our own conclusions about things. It might sound like I'm just, going off on a tangent, but I will note Halloween's coming up, and I do believe Martin Luther nailed those 95 arguments against the Pope at the time to the church door on what was that holiday? Anyway, it was Halloween. Yeah, all Hallows Eve. So no, Elizabeth, I'm so thankful you said what you said, and I just wanted to interject, for my own experiences teaching right now, where I think about it, and I thought about it the whole time we were going through this process.
I mean, this is your government, right? For our listeners. Like, it takes all of us being engaged and not just those that we elect in order to make the changes that we want to see. So let's transition into Proposition 5. Laura, can you give us some insight on that one?
Sure. So I think this one was proposed by one of the council members that was serving on the Charter Review Committee. I think it was maybe Councilman Stonecipher. His concern was that the way that the charter is written, so just maybe to step back a second. So we have a city manager form of government that the mayor and council oversee the auditor, the municipal councilor, and the city manager. And the city manager has control over most of the city employees. So police, fire, water, everybody reports to the city manager if they're not part of the municipal councilor's office or the auditor's office. So the way the charter had been written, or is written still, is that there are limits on how the council members can interfere with employment decisions and whether or not an employee is going to get reprimanded or fired. It's to it helps to kind of insulate the day-to-day operations of municipal government from what might be political changes that happen more frequently. And so he was concerned that the way it was written, that if he had a concern about a city employee's performance, he wouldn't be able to take that directly to the city manager to say, hey, there's somebody who's not doing their job, or we're having this certain problem. Because if he would have done that, he would have been guilty of a misdemeanor. So this changes and allows for the council members to have more communication with the city manager, while the city manager is still retaining ultimate control and authority over most city employees.
Councilwoman Hamon, I would maybe turn to you on this, and I'll speak to it as well, but just to hear from you, what has your experience been like over the last year in office whenever we do hear residents with their concerns, or whatever it might be when it comes to, just the city employees and how to walk that line of not, overstepping our boundaries?
Yeah, I think I honestly do. When I think about this change, I think it's helpful because I think it doesn't take away the that line of, just because I have perceived power and there's someone I don't like that works in the water department, that I'm gonna, tell the city manager what to do about that person. But I have received and do sometimes receive complaints about employees. There was one instance, and I won't say all of it, but where I had asked someone from staff to go to a neighborhood meeting, and I heard back from the neighborhood organization that they believed that the person that came was intoxicated, and while they were there at the meeting, and so I just went to our council staff and said, I don't know what to do with this information, because in the way that the charter is written, I need to be able to provide that feedback, but I can't, I can't have any control or interaction with personnel matters. So staff was able to take that and take that along to staff. So I just was like, I'm going to connect you, residents, neighborhood organization, with staff, and you're going to go address that. But this kind of just, I think, provides a little more clarity around situations like that, to where the fact that I had that knowledge and spoke with, our city council staff about that, and how that information gets relayed to the city manager, I think makes it clearer that I'm not trying to like break any rules or pull any strings. But I just want to be able to convey this information. And so often residents see us as the messengers to staff and to the city manager. And so I think that's like one example where this kind of change helps just streamline and I think clarify that kind of relationship, because even if I provide that information to the city manager and say, these residents experience this thing, from there on out, I cannot be involved. I can't say, okay, I want to report on that, I want a personnel report on that person. But if nothing else, my involvement in that situation and in relaying that information is just allowed and just clearer in that language.
Yeah, it's and I think I'm really glad Laura described earlier the city manager form of government city manager form of government in which we operate, because it for a lot of residents, we might watch the news in some other city and the mayor has fired a police chief or something like that. And then they think, well, if that can happen in that city, then why would it not happen why can't the mayor do it here? The mayor fired the planning director or the zoo director, whatever it was. And I think without that stronger kind of education across all of our residents, letting them know this is the form of government in which we operate, then it's hard to know that the city manager is the person, right, who's over those nearly 5,000 employees. So that's that's just really important. And the experience that Councilwoman Hamon just described is why I have tried to walk. I literally have anxiety. I just do. So in these sorts of instances, when someone says, "Hey, this person from this department or that department is concerning to me," I'm like, "Oh, are they? Okay. Well, here's the city manager's email and phone number, and I'll let you take it from there." And just doing everything I can to really remove myself from those situations, because I just never want to come across as like I use the heavy hand of my position of power to affect someone else's lives.
I think that's particularly important in Oklahoma because Tulsa is the opposite, right? Where they have a strong mayor, and I think we all just assume every city works the same way, and that is definitely not the case. And those, for the two largest cities to be different in that important way, especially like when COVID first hit and responses and decisions and all of that. Same thing with protests, and like there's a lot that goes into it. And knowing that the mayors have known each other for a long time and are close makes it more complicated. And so I don't think we can ever reiterate that enough. All right, let's go to proposition number 6. Laura?
Okay, I think Proposition 6 may have been an issue that was raised by the mayor. So this was a very confusingly worded provision, like, what is the Division of Public Affairs? Who's in it? And sorry, my dog started to re-nest in her bed next to me. But we have drafted it to kind of clarify that who's in the public affairs, city manager, municipal councilor, and how all of that works. To hopefully this is clearer, but if it's not, please let us know and we'll have to try again.
Well, and I will say, and I don't put too much stock into this because trolls will troll, but there is one person on Twitter who's decided that I am trying to personally take over all of the city judges. And I'm trying to change the chart. It's a whole conspiracy to like change the charter, when really truly this is like literally just a language change because of how confusing it is. What does council have control over, and who is under that? And so like someone responded to that person was like, no, literally they already do. And I was like, yeah, we do. We like literally, I was in a meeting where we like set their salaries that one time. So I think there is some of it is just confusing, just because of people, general education of people not necessarily knowing what council specifically oversees. But also, sometimes I've been in this position where I see some language and I'm like, yeah, this looks real fishy. And it's literally just like semantics, like changing things to simplify and kind of streamline the language around it.
So functionally, this changes nothing. This is just like clarifying, like making the words match what happens.
Right. And I will say for Proposition 6, there's a typo in the ballot summary. So we've gotten a lot of calls about that, but it is a word that we're not proposing to change. I think it says compromise instead of comprise. And the textual amendments that were published by the city clerk are correct. The charter currently reads comprise. It would continue to read comprise. So we've gotten a lot of calls on that. And so I wanted to take the opportunity to clarify that. I don't think it has any kind of legal consequence that we have a typo. I think it's minor. It's the Scrivener's error. We can explain it, particularly when it's not a provision of the charter where we're not proposing to change that word. So
PSA, typos happen even in the modern era. All right, so Prop 7 would change the term councilman to council member or councilor, where the charter refers to council representatives. Laura, could you talk about that for us?
Sure. So that's just as straightforward as it sounds. Right now, the charter uses pretty much throughout the word councilman and councilman, councilmen, and that's not appropriate.
That's not accurate in any way.
Right. So this would be updating all of the applicable provisions. So we have that as drafted as more of a catch-all, so that our office would work with the city clerk to go back through the charter rather than list every single place.
So I was going to say, do you have to does each one have to be like its own thing, or can you be like, no, we're going to change this word in the whole document?
We have it drafted, so we'll change this word throughout the charter rather than list every single charter provision that might say councilman in it, because that would be an extremely lengthy ballot.
Sure. So simple, straightforward, but no less important for that.
Yes, and I believe this was a change recommended by Councilperson Cooper.
Councilwoman Hamon, I saw you unmuted.
Well, I was just going to say because I know when both municipal codes, but also the charter gets updated, there's like there'll sometimes be like a little like, this was, 1933 that, or whatever, that vote took place that made that update. So are we essentially to assume that this was probably how it was written when the charter was first chartered, and this change is like literally just been through the history of our city? It's always had this language. And because as far as I know, I remember when I like flipped through the charter to like see, oh, when was this sort of thing changed? There's nothing indicating that anything like that had been considered before.
Right. Yeah. I think it's just always been the masculine.
When I believe when the city was founded, we didn't have any women city councilors or non-male identifying city councilors. And so this is another example of a charter change that is adapting to the times as diverse representation continues to reflect our city and governmental entities.
Which was why I proposed it. I think that's a great description of it. I'd been by the time the committee was meeting, I'd served with Councilwoman Hamon and Councilwoman Nice for the past year, and they are, as we know, our city's 10th and 11th women to serve on city council, and which is super cool to serve with both of them at the same time. It's like just walking through history with them. It's really cool, and to see them serve at the same time too, right? In the same way that Councilwoman Nice and I are the first time we're 2 biracial or Black individuals have served on city council at the same time. Or I'm the first biracial or Black person outside of Ward 7 to serve on city council, and first openly LGBTQ representative. Like, it's just reflecting more broadly our city. And I always think of my middle school students and the fact that language matters, whether it was that Martin Luther Protestant Reformation moment or the Declaration or the Constitution, and what the language says sets the tone for what our people believe is possible.
Oh, I love that. That's, yeah, perfect. We have 2 more. Proposition 8. And just so we have time to try and get to a couple listener questions, Laura, what's up with Prop 8? What's the
That's extremely straightforward. I think it's just revising what the city's powers are, and like we can do things to advance public health, safety, welfare. I think it adds welfare to the list of powers. So it's nothing terribly earth-shattering.
Beautiful. Do we have any comment from our representatives from council?
As someone who took the oath of office on the Constitution, this is sort of yeah, it's just right there. It's just literally right there in our U.S. Constitution. And I thought, well, I didn't propose this one, but I think it was one of our municipal councilors. And when that happened, I was like, it wasn't there. So that no-brainer.
Bailey, you got the last one?
Oh, sure.
My bad. I'm sorry I caught you off guard.
Not me explaining, but Laura, what is Proposition 9? What does it tell us, and what do we need to know about it?
So the way that is worded right now in the charter is also really confusing, and it talks about when city employees and officials can receive free things. And I know that some people have had some questions about, like, is this provision to make it such that city employees can get free services? Like, no. This is just that we could. If I happen to be watching City Channel 20 on Cox while I'm at the office, and I'm watching the city council meeting, that I'm not having to pay for that Cox subscription. So it is while I'm performing my city employee duties that so it just clarifies that section and takes out some antiquated terms about, I think it was like heating factories or something odd that's no longer exists.
So definitely due for an update then.
Yes.
Awesome. So 9 changes to the city charter. And I don't know, I love this because these are all things that, with a couple of exceptions, probably seem fairly mundane, but are actually, I think, probably really important to do. Like some are very, in terms of changing words like councilman, are really important to like show respect to the people who serve on the council as well as the people they represent. Some of them are just like good sense in terms of like cleaning up language, but man, I'm a government nerd, and stuff like this is why. So this makes me happy.
Well, we're now going to move into our questions that we received from Let's Fix This, Let's Pod This listeners. So thank you all for tuning in and sending questions early. If there are things that can't be answered now, we can try to get an answer and send it in the show notes at another time. So one of the comments that was made by a listener, and maybe Elizabeth, we could start with you to get some perspective on it. We touched on it a little bit earlier, but the language of the charter is designed to exclude a lay person from participating. The modernization, it was put in quotations, of language doesn't seem to fix this. Can you touch on that sentiment and then discuss, again, ways that people can engage in this process and feel more included in language?
Yes. I have been so fortunate as to be an incredibly highly educated person. And even and my first language is English. And even I struggled through the document. However, I don't want to flood Laura's emails with every thought that every human who lives in this enormous city has ever had. But I will say that I think the more that residents think about bureaucratic city staff, people who are not elected but who work for the city, as experts on whom they can call to better understand the way that our city works, I think that that helps drop that barrier. You can send Laura an email and ask her a question about something that you don't understand, and she is incredibly kind and articulate and prompt in her responses, and then you'll be set. So I think that's what I would say, encouraging people to think about city staff as resources for our understanding, because they do have expertise in this case, legal language. And so think about them as those resources.
And one quick thing I want to add before we add other perspective from our council members and our city attorney is that the language is written in legal language to ensure that it specifies and does the thing that we think it's going to do. And so while that language is complicated, it's important that we're expressing it in the charter in the way that it gets it right to execute and do the thing that we think we're voting on. So anybody else have feedback on that?
Yeah, and I think I'm with Elizabeth. Like, I was like, before the charter change review committee, I had all these high hopes. I was like, I'm going to sit down with the charter, and I'm like I have time to do that, right? Like, and so I think there's a piece to it that and I think there is this idea that council members even are somehow know everything, or once you're and I think that too is there's that element I remember even running of people being like, well, what qualifies you to be, and I think there's that sense that you have to be a lawyer to run for office, or you have to be in business to run for office, because you're supposed to be able to speak in this specific type of language. And and I just I still struggle with our agendas, because they're very boring. they're very dry, right? They're just, because they're written in this language that is not I've not been trained to read like that, and so a lot of it is trusting that our staff are able to provide us that support and that be that resource, but that also that we can be that bridge to those staff members. So sometimes people will come to me with questions and I'm like, I don't really know how what that infrastructure name means, what that means, or and so let me connect you to our public works department. And I think similarly with things like the charter, that's where that kind of how Liz was saying, just that pulling on resources of those experts, that they're that's what they're there for. And like Liz said, in more often than not, I have they seem very eager to be helpful and be supportive in that way, because not everyone's going to have that expertise or knowledge, and we need one another to walk each other through it, because I can add and I think that's, to me, what makes a person qualified to be in office is just the ability to ask questions and be inquisitive, and not feel dumb for asking questions, or not be quiet because I think I'm going to be seen as dumb. It's just, I don't know what I don't know, and that's not my my wheelhouse. So
we have a couple other questions, and these I'm going to kind of go a little bit rapid fire because we're running short on time. One question, Laura, is something that I think there may just be a pretty straightforward answer to, because you alluded to it earlier. We had a listener ask notice that public notice seemed like it was only placed in the Journal Record, which is a great newspaper. I'm a subscriber and I love it, but it's probably the least widely read of the newspapers in folks in Oklahoma City. Why the Journal Record?
I think that there is a state law provision that points to the Journal Record. Well, it doesn't name the Journal Record specifically, but I think there's something. I'll have to look it up, and I can send you the citation.
No, that's fine. But there's it's not just oh, we picked the Journal Record. It's there's something that requires it to be in that newspaper.
Right. And, yeah.
Super interesting.
And so there's a little I have learned, because I think the Journal Record is literally called that because it was the business paper that was the journal of record for all of these sorts of public notices when during statehood and things. And so that, like, I put that together. I was like, wait, journal of record. Why is that a term I keep hearing when we're posting notices? And I think that's literally why they ended up calling themselves that.
That's super interesting.
To add on to that, I mean, you run into the same thing with statewide documents, right? So, like, if you submit a ballot initiative, they have to publish it in papers, and they always do journal record. I think the Secretary of State typically does the Oklahoma and the Tulsa World, but there's some discussion, I don't know if in Oklahoma, but certainly around the country, of this tradition of putting things in papers is like diminishing, right? Because as subscriber rates diminish, there's like an argument to be made that, like, would it be better to publish it on the website or those? I mean, they often do those things too, but this definition of what it means to be published I think is evolving along with our society. Scott, do you have one more question?
Yes. Lastly, so in Proposition 1, there is a reference to more than 8 wards. Are there plans to expand the number of wards? I know this is something that, like, I feel like it comes up on Twitter like every 18 months or so, and it's like lots of like a flutter and consternation for like a couple of weeks about how, like, we don't have enough wards and we should have, like, 30 or something instead, but we don't. So, like, is there a plan, or like is there thought that at some point we would need to increase the number of wards? Is that why that's in there, or like why the reference to more than 8 wards?
So I'll go ahead and try and answer that quickly, and then I'll defer to the council members. But that is something that could be done by ordinance. The additional seats could be added. And we do have redistricting coming up here after the census. So that'll be taking place in 2021. So there's going to be a larger conversation, I anticipate, in light of the census. And then that's something that it would be up to council whether or not to add additional wards.
Yeah, at the very end of our our final meeting, after that was over, I spoke with our municipal council, and they walked me through what that process would look like. And seems like as we learn what that census result looks like next fall, God willing, then we'll have a better sense of what number of wards would make this a representative democracy. And as a final note, hey, go fill out your census. Go fill out your census. Our neighborhoods depend on you filling out your census. I made that song up right then. You're welcome. Oh my God, this is recorded.
It's true. It's true. Yes. Please fill out your census, and please, as we said before we took you guys out of the green room, we had a prolonged soliloquy on registering to vote and not waiting until October 27th to request your absentee ballot. So I think that's going to wrap us up.
I have one last thing.
Oh, yes.
So before I know we don't have too much time, but to just sort of build on that Twitter conversation that pops up, the other one that tends to pop up that does have to be a charter amendment is council member pay. So right now, council members make $12,000 a year per the charter, which I don't believe has been updated since, like, I think it was the early 90s, maybe, is the last time there was a vote on that. So even then, not a lot of money, but and the mayor, I believe it is $24,000. And I know it's like really taboo for elected officials to be like, you should pay me more money. But I just want to, for anyone who, because I constantly see this conversation happen in the world, is that, yes, I don't love the idea of elected officials like being like, yeah, pay me more. But the other piece to that is, unless you pay your elected officials enough to be a full-time job, you only get them part-time. Yep. So like literally right now at the beginning of this, I was multitasking because my full-time job is like my biggest project of the year is literally in like 5 days. Yeah. So like I am unable to answer phone calls related to council. I'm unable to answer email right now. And in the best of times, I'm usually 2 months behind. So I think that is another conversation that going forward, as you know, we hopefully someday get out of COVID and our economy is a little bit better, is a conversation I know that I'm interested in having. And I've talked with other elected officials more generally, not necessarily at the city level, but multiple levels, who are also interested in that because they know what it means to have people who have worked in nonprofits, people who have been teachers, people who have kids, people who have student debt, running for office and feeling like it's something that they can actually survive on rather than having to take multiple jobs and only be partially available for their constituents.
And I know we're on the end of time right now, but I must add, going back to what Elizabeth said about being able to have access to the charter and knowing what our governing documents are, and as Laura mentioned, the last time residents updated our charter was about a summer ago. I quit my job where we finally got a teacher raise, as you all recall. I quit my job, and I refuse to believe when I do taxes next year that I will make above $30,000. Like teaching 2 adjunct jobs at OCU and UCO, that $12,000 Councilwoman Hamon just noted a year from City Council. No, I do this because I love being in the classroom. You heard those conversations I said I was having with my students. I love those. And I love our neighborhoods, and I love civics. And and Councilwoman Hamon working in mental health, like she's not doing that for the money either. I believe she ran a campaign talking about how do we address homelessness, like we're doing this because people, and I'm not saying everyone who makes a whole bunch of money doesn't think like that, but I've seen too often in our history, not just in America, but across the world, where sometimes folk are detached from the way everyday people are living their lives. And I would argue because Councilwoman Hamon and I are so in that struggle with people and making sure we're paying our bills, it makes it more relatable for us. But I'll tell you, I would love in a moment to flip this all around and for my council position to be the full-time one. And I was teaching an adjunct class at OCU and adjunct class at UCO and be able to dedicate full-time to emails and phone calls and meeting with constituents. I would love it.
You don't have to be worried about coming on our show and advocating for higher pay for elected officials. I think, I'm on board. So, I think that probably is going to have to do us for today. Thank you so much to all of our guests, Councilwoman JoBeth Hamon, Councilman James Cooper, Laura McDevitt, Liz Sidler, Sidler. I'm sorry. Sidler from Generation Citizen. And as always, Bailey, Andy, it's a real pleasure.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, thanks, listeners.
Thank you very
and
much.
viewers. And I apologize. I think there's been audio issues along the way. So if you're listening to this on your podcast app after the fact, I probably put a disclaimer at the beginning to apologize. It's a weird time. The internet doesn't always cooperate.
And this is the biggest panel we've ever had, like in person or virtual. So I think we did pretty well.
That's right.
I'm sorry. I have to just say one more thing about that mental pay thing. I want you to know that was up for conversation, and we put it aside because to have that conversation during a historic pandemic with the unemployment rate, what it is, and all that, like absolutely not. But there will come a time where we have that conversation. But now, got some more work ahead of us to get the people what they need.
Thank you, Councilman Cooper. And also, I want to echo what David Glover put on Facebook here in the chat, that if you are interested in running for City Council in Oklahoma City, filing is in December. There are 4 seats that will be up for election, which is almost half the council, so that's a big deal. All right, on behalf of everyone at Let's Fix This, Let's Pod This, and my dog who is anxious to go outside downstairs, thank you for listening. Everyone, stay safe and have a great week. Right.